And good evening, everyone. ESS, Empire State Sports, proudly presents the Wise Guys Sports Talk Show. Your host tonight, Joey Riem, Dave Barlett, myself, Pete Gosselin, our special guest, the president of the North Country Sports Hall of Fame, Ed Murphy. Ed, welcome to our program.
Thanks a lot, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ed, we're going to let you start off our show by giving us a little bio of yourself. Tell us your beginnings and where you came from, high school, or right up straight through, and then everybody will know exactly who Ed is.
Raised and still live in Lowville, Lewis County, pretty small area in the Section 3, the Frontier League part of the region of the North Country. Lived here all my life, graduated high school in 1994, played a total of 4 sports, but at the varsity level, I played 3 sports. Wasn't by any stretch of the imagination any sort of a star, but I always stayed close with sports. And after high school, I jumped in and did some radio broadcasting on our local radio station, WLLG. Did that for 18 years. While I was doing that, I got involved in things. Coached some, actually my first coaching gig was doing Legion baseball the year after I got done playing. So at 19, I was playing at JCC baseball, plus I was coaching in the summertime. So, and I still stay just recently with the Watertown Rapids. I'm working with them. So been involved, especially in baseball for a long time. The radio broadcasting, we did just about every sport you could think of. In the Lowville, Boonville area. We also covered Beaver River and South Lewis. So mainly I'm a Lewis County guy as far as that goes. I've also done some sports officiating. I've done baseball. I've umpired high school baseball since 2008 and football since 2010. So I'm pretty, for all my life, I've stayed pretty close with the local high school sports scene.
So when you said radio broadcasting, play-by-play, you were the lead guy and covering all sorts of sports or specific sports, or?
I jumped into it. I was invited by the then sports director. Again, this happened right after I was out of high school, my first year off, to just kind of watch how they did their broadcast of a high school football game up here in Lowville. The next day, I went with somebody to broadcast a game on my own, so that was kind of nerve-wracking. And once I got used to that, I did some basically color commentary because I was, wasn't far away from playing sports as far as that goes. I built into doing some play-by-play eventually. We did a lot of the winter sports like basketball. The game moves so quickly that we usually did that by ourselves. So football, we'd have 2 guys doing that or whatnot. So, and then in 2008, I believe was the year the director of that resigned. So I actually ran kind of the sports department for the radio station for about 8 or 10 of those years.
Well, cool. That's Pete was doing that himself, a little radio background. That's how we got into this business and how we kind of got into this little show that we have. So
yeah, we never really got into the shows and things like that. But I mean, and I guess the big claim to fame after looking at, I could probably have to make a list of all the different, the good teams that you saw and, the memorable games and things like that. But one claim to fame, I guess I have is, and we'd see a lot of the, like I say, we travel. So we get down in the Utica and Syracuse area because our teams would play them in sectionals and things like that. Did some games down in Manley Fieldhouse for basketball. So it was really cool. But the famous guy, I guess, that I actually got to broadcast, he actually played at Beaver River, was Latavius Murray when he played at Onondaga. So my claim to fame was I always picked him on my fantasy football league team because I could say, well, I actually broadcast one of his games. So, just kind of a cool thing. Like I say, I never really thought much about it because you're always in the moment. But, I did get to meet a lot of cool athletes and see some really good sports over the years.
And so now you've moved into the officiating side of things, so baseball and football, you said?
Baseball and football, yeah. So that's what I started. I basically got involved with Little League, probably I want to say about 2004 or so. And that the guest list, just to drop another name, and this is in the Syracuse area. We actually, our area hosted our state Little League tournament for the 9 and 10-year-olds. And in 2011, the Janesville DeWitt team qualified out of what we would call our pod or our region for the state tournament. So they represented, the upstate area or whatnot. And Buddy Boeheim was on that team for Janesville DeWitt. So Coach Boeheim missed, he was doing the Olympic trials or something like that. One of those years, Pan Ams or something like that was going on. He missed one game, but then he popped in for another game. So all the local people got to meet him. And so I guess that's my other thing that was kind of neat in my sports memorabilia collection is I've got a 10-year-old Buddy Boeheim autographed baseball. So I don't know what that's going on on eBay, but it's kind of neat.
Well, and obviously Buddy's playing
Yeah.
right now for SU. So,
Yeah.
You have that connection as well.
Right.
So in football, are you varsity football? High school
Yep.
varsity football?
Jeepers. It probably took me usually about 3 or 4 years to become active. So started that in 2010. So around 12 or 13 went active. So I've done, I haven't done any sectional finals. I've done a couple of regional. Actually, I did one regional game. I was an alternate for that. And gotten to see a lot of, pretty good football as far as that goes. The thing that's a little different is after I joined was when Section 10, Watertown and Carthage years ago used to play up in Section 10. So they now come with us as far as that goes. So there isn't that, we don't see you guys as far as the Section 10 schools quite as much as we used to.
Well, Watertown is with us right now. They will
Right,
be.
you're one back.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, but it's only been one season. So
Right.
all right. Well, so obviously one of the main reasons we had you on was we wanted to get the history and some knowledge about our North Country Sports Hall of Fame, and
Yep.
I know that you're obviously play a big role in that. Let us know how that all came about. I remember hearing things, seeing things when it first
Yeah.
started, but give us a full story on the North Country Sports Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it took me, it's funny you say that because it took me before I really decided that it was something that we wanted to do. I spent probably a good year and a half just trying to get the word out, reaching out. I started with the colleges and started to reach out to some high school people and just said, here's what we've got going on if you want to get involved in this or whatnot. And we, eventually we got official and started our forums and tried to get as many people. So I've sent out thousands of, it started with emails. Now we jumped right onto Facebook or whatnot, but where it really started a while ago, one of my past coaches threw out the idea to me, and I was in my early 20s at the time. I want to say this is about 2001 or 2002, something like that. And I was busy. Like I say, I look sometimes at my resume and I think to myself, how did I ever get some of this stuff accomplished? So I was busy with doing stuff and I was still doing the radio thing. So I stayed too busy really to be able to do it. So finally, one of the things that I guess that jumped out at me was when the Watertown Daily Times did their top 100 athletes. And we think, and a couple of things, the coach that kind of inspired my thoughts of it, or we talked a little bit about it. He actually was a high school teammate of a couple of guys, Wayne Ferguson, who's in our class to come in 2020. I was a Beaver River wrestling coach. He was a football teammate of him, and his quarterback on the high school team was a guy named Dave Tremblay, who became a baseball coach, and he was the manager with the Orioles for a little bit. So I think that's kind of where he was thinking with the history. But when the Times did their top 100 athletes, I guess some of the names that jumped out at me when they did that, now I'm thinking I'm in my late 20s, about 30 years old. So I'm not a historian by any stretch of imagination. I was a fan. I was somebody that stayed close to the game. But when I started looking at that list, people like the Gogolak brothers just jumped out at me. And it was kind of one of those OMG moments where I said, this is pretty crazy. This is something that we might be able to pursue in the future. So it took a while for, to get the organizational thing. And I think I'm finding out why it's never been done before, because it is a pretty big task as far as trying to figure things out. So, invited some people that I knew. We kind of had some informal meetings, tried to set the groundwork for how we wanted to go about it. We had to determine a couple of things, mainly our parameters, which we decided was going to be the Section 10 area plus the Section 3 portion of the Frontier League. So, because you look at the North Country, I think that's pretty much what it is. But I mean, you've also got some of the Section 7 areas, the Plattsburgh area. We didn't want to get too big. Could that happen in the future? I'm sure it probably could. So it kind of took a life of its own. We then grew it to try to, what we've always had was open membership. So anybody that wanted to get involved could be a voting member, and that's still what our policy is. So we started that. The early portions of it were in 2016. By about the turn of 2016 to 2017, we're pretty well on board to figure out how we're going to do things. We took our nominations, and we actually had 40 that first year, which was a pretty good number, I think. But one thing that was shocking to I think us as a board at the time was all the names that we didn't get. And eventually we've started to get those trickle in. So, I mean, something that where we've taken, probably over 100 years of history, we've only had 4 official classes. So we're still in what I've always said is really catch-up mode as far as that goes, and that's one of the decisions we've kind of made now is to try to look at things and in a way to try to look at our history, not just our more recent history.
I see your first inductee.
So how many? Go ahead, Pete.
Your first inductee class, Ed, was 2017, if I'm correct.
2017.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you had a few names that we know, we all know, and that we've interviewed. We've interviewed Coach Welch from Potsdam State. We've interviewed Missy West. One that we've been trying to get a hold of, and hopefully that'll come in the future, is also Rick Carlisle. So we've seen some big names on that list. Coach Welch is always going to be a fan favorite of ours. True.
He's one of mine.
True North Country man.
Yeah.
You gotta take us through the induction of Jerry Welch. I'm sure it was a phenomenal night, but I really would like to hear more about that initial.
Yeah. And I think that was the scary part about it too. And I will talk specifically with him because he's what I would call, just on paper, when you look at, the debates of what you do, he's a no-brainer, but he's a guy that, I mean, it's just cool that after we've gotten him inducted, that he really cares about the future. He's given us some other names that we should consider and things like that. So some unofficial nominations, some others that it's funny. So he's a neat guy to talk with. And it's neat when I see his number, and we're usually talking some basketball. So to be able to talk to a guy of that high level of a basketball mind, still in his 80s, is just a treat for me, to be honest with you. But one of the things, so like I say about, we figured it all out. We got a class of 10, which I think we just about, the only thing we missed was we didn't really have a hockey guy that first year. But I think we hit just about every aspect. We had coaches and things like that. So some athletes, and the names were tremendous. And the thing that I always jump out about, a couple of things to point out of that first one, and Scott Connell, who's my vice president, probably said it best when he summed it up. Because we have a cocktail hour, then we have the induction, and what Scott was saying was we had to really kind of herd everybody in to sit down because they're having such a fun time talking with each other. It was almost, Scott's thing was like an old reunion type thing of sorts. And, we had, Rick was just starting what was going to be preseason at the time, was October-ish or whatnot. His parents were there. So he was the one that was probably the least represented. He would have had more people there from his family, but there was also his parents missed out at somebody's 50th wedding anniversary in their family that same weekend. So to have them, spend the time to come to that was really neat. But so we had it at the Watertown Elks Club, and when I got there, of course, I'm nervous and trying to figure everything out and that sort of thing. So I looked at what was an empty room, and it looked pretty neat with the setup that we had. And then when I saw everybody sitting down, and I told people, I said, now I'm going to admit I'm nervous talking in front of this many people. There's 150 to 200 people there. It was just such a neat transformation to see an empty room when I got there at 3:30. Then all of a sudden at 7 o'clock when we sat down and everybody it sat down. Just that's the thing that will always jump out at me. So I mean that class, like you say, was just, and it was a lot of fun. The one that was the local, like I said, we had some national figures like Rick Carlisle. We had Mr. North Country and Jerry Welsh, who, obviously, what he did in his career and how he stayed up here. We had some other people who grew up here, and another neat tie that I think that we had was a guy like Jim Berkman for college, and he's gone to Salisbury State University. And local guys, Boots Gaffney was the IC iconic coach who had passed away, but Neil Abel, the Lowville wrestling coach, was there. And if you've never met Neil Abel, his son Mike went up to St. Lawrence, but Neil could probably do stand-up comedy anywhere. So there was just such a diverse group of people. The characters, Missy West, the big thing, and she does motivational speaking type stuff now. But when we got done with that too, the other comment that I heard was we got to induct Missy West every year, and so we understand that. So it was just, and the other one that just came to mind too was Casey Powell. So we had Missy and Casey Powell are around my age, and we had obviously some people like Rocco Canale, Boots Gaffney, who were, I don't want to say turn of the century guys, but they were in the early part of the 1900s as far as their coaching and playing days goes. And then we had, obviously some current people like that are still in the game, like Rick Carlisle. So it was a very diverse group. It was probably, to me, and I've always treated our induction ceremony like it's kind of like my Christmas, so to speak, or, some people really like, whether it's the NCAA tournament or whatever it is, it's their favorite thing, their Super Bowl. I guess it's kind of our Super Bowl, but it's a lot of fun every year. But boy, that first one was just, I think it's because because it was the first one. It just brings back so many memories.
Yeah, I was secretary for my local high school Hall of Fame board. And the first year I was a little nervous myself, and then every year after that it was a routine. But it was, I understand totally what you're talking about when they have the little get together hour before, and then it's like, where is everybody? And then all of a sudden they just swarm in a room, and the seats fill up more than you think.
Well, when we had my girlfriend's actually our secretary, so she was there for the moral support type thing. And then it's funny, I forget what time we opened the doors, 5 o'clock, 5:30, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it was like a few people came in. We had one, a couple families were early bird type people, and then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, and it just seemed like everybody got there within a 20-minute time period. And I kept thinking to myself, is it 7 o'clock yet? And they'd say, well, it's only 6:15 type thing or whatever. So, and like I said, the one I mentioned, Boots Gaffney, his son Pete was there. And one of the things too, so I'm scrambling around, kind of figuring out where our raffle tickets are or whatever what was we're doing. And somebody came up to me and he says, have you seen Pete Gaffney? And I said, yeah, he just walked in. I don't know. I just met Pete Gaffney 2 seconds ago. And he says, I haven't seen him in 50 years. And I think that's one of the things where the guy wanted to see a guy who he hasn't seen since high school. That's one of the things that I was talking about, just what a special occasion it was. Every year, like you say, we get a routine. Not to say that 2018 was great, 2019 as well. 2020 is on hold because of COVID. But to me, I treat them just like they're your kids. You might have your oldest kid, but every time you're like having a different kid every year sort of thing. So they're all special, but like I say, I think that first one, I don't know if we can ever duplicate it just because of how crazy it was. And the class was, all these classes are great. We've only put 30 people in. So, I mean, every class for the next few years is going to be very, very special. But that first one, I think it was just the anticipation because we'd never done it before.
I was looking at your Facebook page, and it's quite ironic that the picture that's on your page,
I never update much, but yeah.
is with Coach Welch, but the people around him in that photo, I mean, you got some names there. You got Coach Myrna, uh, uh, Tom Miller, you got one of my favorites, Mr. Coach from Canton, Mr. Howerhand.
Yeah.
Coach K-Max on there. That's quite a group picture right there. That must have been one hell of a night. I'll tell you that. If you get all those guys in one room.
Well, Brian Nort's from General Brown, and he's a Beaver River guy originally, so he's a Lewis County guy. He's on our board, and I remember when they went up to eat, they were one of the tables that probably got to eat before us or whatever. But anyways, he walked up and he was with all these guys. Coach Miller was another one of them, and I don't, some of the guys I had heard of, but because of my age, they were coaching when I was playing, so I don't really know them on a personal basis. But I knew it was kind of a Section 10 type table, and I just teased him. He is a Potsdam graduate, but I told Brian that he'd been adopted by the Section 10 coaches all of a sudden that evening. So, and that's not only are they Section 10 coaches, but to have the ties to the coaching tree that Coach Welsh has is pretty crazy. You can't really, that's the other thing that I've always remarked about doing this is how interconnected we are, and you can't hardly go anywhere without up there without some sort of connection that goes back to Jerry Welsh.
So true.
Well, to think that was the first induction is amazing, and Pete mentioned Salmon Rivers. I'm the MC and in charge of St. Lawrence Central, because I'm the athletic director. So I've emceed ours for the last 6 years, and it's like you said, it's the day I look forward to the most as being the athletic director, because that is your day of seeing people, reminiscing, and that's what the Hall of Fame things are. They're all about. People get to see each other they haven't seen each other in ages, and it's like you said, all of a sudden you're getting these big names together, be it in the North Country Sports Hall of Fame or at your local school. Like, hey, here comes some Larry legends, or some Salmon River legends, or some Lowville legends. I mean, that's a big deal. So I think what you're doing is great. And Ed, I guess one of the things I'm asked is there a place that is like home? I know you did the inductions at the Elk Lodge, but what is home to the North Country Hall of Fame? Are there plaques? Is there an area where we could go see these things?
It started, it's funny because that's one of the first questions that we got when we first started is how we go about it. And one of my other things, and going back to the background that I guess I missed, was, again, because I was nervous about it, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a whim, and it actually had some shelf life and some legs to it. I met with pretty much one of the founders of the Syracuse Sports Hall of Fame. And even though we're different, I just wanted to see, structurally, how do you do things or whatever. And he threw out the idea. I asked him, I said, now, and they have a place, one of the car dealerships is where they are down just off from 81. But anyways, so I asked him, I said, that to me is one of the big things of, a lot of work and stuff. And he explained to me how they do theirs. But he told me, he says, don't open anything up until you have a first few classes, because it's going to be a shell. I mean, really we can, and I always brag about things like I look at our history and say, okay, like a Pete Gogolak changed the way you kick a football, so to speak. So he's obviously historical, and Rick Carlisle's one of 10 people to ever have won an NBA championship as a coach and a player. And we look at like Funny Side, the horse that won the Kentucky Derby, the owners were from Sackett's Harbor. So things like that. So could we have gotten stuff and asked for stuff to put, memorabilia in a place? We probably could have, but we wanted to make sure that our first few years is about our induction classes and not to get too far. So now we're hearing that question more often. We probably went for the first couple of years without anybody really caring that we didn't have a museum, so to speak. So that's one of our big things. We need to probably get back and put that on an agenda. But like I say, with our little pause that we're in because of our COVID issues, I think that's one of the things post-COVID that we really want to at least come up with a game plan. We may not have a place, but one of the other thoughts that we had that some people have said is, we might want to have a couple different satellite stuff. So maybe one in Canton, one in Watertown, one in the Lewis County area, specifically about that. Now that we have 30 people in 4 years, we'll be on our 5th year coming up. We probably could, spread things around or whatnot. So that's all, to be determined as far as that goes. But yeah, we're looking at, our base is kind of our home turf. Pretty much things happen in Watertown. And I think that's a couple of different things geographically. And now with things like Zoom, I think having Zoom meetings will get more interest up in the northern part of our area, number one. And, so sometimes it's just travel. Coach Myrna is one of our board members, but he can't make a lot of meetings because he's an hour away, things like that. So, and the other thing is when we decided to open this up and we had a board, most of the time people invite their friends and they have some sort of a connection with them. So it's going to be a Watertown type growth or whatnot. So that's our big thing is, how do we get people up in you guys' neck of the woods? We have plenty of inductees, but to get those, those people on board and stuff. And you mentioned like the high school things as well. And that's the other thing that we really looked at is to say how many of these schools have their own halls of fame. And try to take some ideas that some people use or whatnot. And again, like you were saying about when you have your own high school hall of fame is what I equate that to when you're saying about, legends from St. Lawrence Central or Salmon River or Lowville or wherever. I usually go to sectionals for mainly basketball. I go to other sports, but I look at the basketball ones and you look at Class D, and sometimes those small schools always seem to have the biggest crowds and the most representation because it's more home. There's a home feel to that. So I see that's like I say when you have an induction for a local high school, like if we started one at Lowville, people would say, well, are we big enough to have one? But you got to remember too how and like I say, I think when you have whether it be Coach Welsh or sometimes our first inducting class was the Belleville basketball team. And that's a class at the time was probably Class E, but it was a Class D team or whatnot. And those guys are still in the area and really, really close with each other. So like I say, that's something that's in the near future. I think that's going to be our next really thing that makes the news is going to be, where do we set up shop, so to speak. And we've had a couple different ideas that are bandied about, but again, it's something that I think we really want to be able to display things like plaques and memorabilia and stuff. And I think that's really going to be our next thing of how we get to like a phase 2 in this thing, because I think, like you say, everybody's now knows about it and they know who our induction people are, but to really and I think too, to really, when we have the protocols and things that the restrictions are lifted for COVID, to really have a big, sort of a celebration, to have mainly what I'm looking to is to have a Hall of Fame weekend and not just an induction night.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. And it'd be nice if, the one thing that the high schools can get away with, it's not getting away with it. We have planned it around, usually a football game or a sporting athletic, a function leading into that weekend. So it'd be nice if there was something you could tie that around. That would be great.
Yep.
So what are the plans? When's the normal time frame? So obviously we missed 2020, and what are your plans moving forward as you wait this out? Is there going to be a 2021 class?
Right. Well, that's like I say, we've had the 2020 class. Normally, our induction ceremony is our Columbus Day weekend. So, and my original thought, I guess, plan A of my plans was we always tried to, and we've still kind of, there's some people that sit around saying, okay, if it's not broke, let's fix it, sort of thing. So that, and they debate when we should have it, even though it's been very successful. But would we move something to the spring? The way we set up just our timeline, it just works better to do October because we usually have around a springtime sort of a vote. So it just makes more sense from a planning standpoint. But because 2020 was on pause, let's say, my first initial reaction was let's do a springtime induction for them, and hopefully we can do a fall time one in 2021. We're kind of, and I tell people we can figure out our game plans, but we're still kind of hamstrung to a certain degree based on like we've had it at Elks Clubs or Mott Inn was our second one. The Italian American Club was our third induction. If they have restrictions and we have a class of 7 in 2020, how do we go about that? I guess the only thing is if it looks like we're still going to go through the spring with the restrictions, we could look at possibly an outdoor type event in the summertime. That could be something, and we're going to eventually have to decide. There's a few people that are on board saying, let's just skip 2021, do 2020 and 2021. And others are pretty firm to say we should have a class every year. It just depends on how much catch up, I guess, we have to do as far as that goes. So like I say, we've got kind of a plan A, plan B type approach. So that's what normally it looks like. It's allowed us, I guess sometimes I take pride in procrastinating. So I guess I've got a little bit of an excuse to look at it to say, okay, there's really not a lot that we have to do. But I guess too, like I say, how aggressive do we want to get in with another induction class in 2021? That'd be the question that we have to eventually, we're going to have to figure that out. In looking at what some other places have done, I'm not sure they actually, even if your process hadn't started yet, I think a lot of places just didn't do one in 2020. They just didn't do an induction class then, just because they knew that. And like you say, high schools or some other areas, it might only take, a few weeks or a couple months to plan. My standpoint, I mean, like you say, you always look at that induction ceremony that's the Super Bowl type thing or whatever, but I'm pretty much planning 12 months a year to try to figure out when we get done with that first that induction class on October 7th, on October 8th, my wheels are turning to say, okay, how are we going to do next year's? So, again, we're kind of in a holding pattern, but we're kind of at that same point in time now where we're into January where we got to kind of, firm some decisions up.
Well, I'm in the same boat because we have debated so many times to figure out what we're going to do about ours. It looks like we've just decided we're going to push it back and we're going to miss a year. We'll get our 2020 inductions done in the fall, but you're totally right. I mean, when our ceremony is done, I'm meeting with my committee within the next week to start working on nominees and I'm sure most Hall of Fames are just that way. So.
Yeah, and we have the other thing too, that just to try to get some more the word out, like you say originally, what our goal is here with chatting about this is I don't think necessarily that we're going to change a whole lot, but like you say too, is to try to say, okay, we've got say 40 names that are in, we picked 7 this year, we're down to 33, to try to get that word out to get some more, get some more feelers out for some more names. So like I say, I wouldn't go as aggressive because we still have about I want to say we have in the low 50s for numbers. And I tell everybody those first 40 names that we've gotten, and I'm not just trying to be politically correct by saying this, I mean, they're all going to get in. Eventually, they're all going to, I mean, all those names are all quality names. So we're not going to ever run out of names. It just, like I said, it just depends on how aggressive we want to go out as far as trying to get some more ones. So, I mean, if we don't get one name in, we'll still be able to, and I tell people the way that we've done things, we basically have a final ballot and if you make 60% of those votes you get in that year, the ones that were the finalists, if we could go off from that list without any new names, and that would be a great 2021 class. If we get other names, like I say, you look at, St. Lawrence Central, somebody like Brian Sosha, there's so many names out there and then you go into, so like I say, some of the decades earlier or whatever, there's just so many different, avenues you can go at. So I mean, it's embarrassing to me that some of the names that we haven't put in, and it's nothing wrong with it. It just takes some time.
Yep.
Well, it's a difference too that you're talking about a 3-4 year old
right.
Hall of Fame, not something that's
people.
been around for 20 years, and now you're trying to justify names you're putting in. You're trying to not put them all in 1 year and try and spread it out a little bit. Yeah.
Hey, and maybe Pete can back me up on this. Ed, that debate, I don't care if you think you get caught up, that debate will never end because we've been going for 20 years and we still have people going, I can't believe so-and-so from, and I'm like, hey, I got to be honest. I don't even know. I don't even know that person. So, and that's where you got to have older people on your committee to be able to remember those people. But yeah, that I don't think that'll ever end in any Hall of Fame committee. I mean, you see it in the regular baseball Hall of Fame. There's still arguments for guys that are, Gil Hodges. That name has been bandied about for 50 years and he's still not in. So I don't think that'll ever change. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. That's just what I was going to say. As long as there's no bloodshed in those debates, to have a debate is very healthy because that's sometimes the controversies or the Pete Rose with baseball or whatever, the controversies are what keeps you going. It really is. So yeah, as long as it's, but to have, I think I want to say it was the Friday night or the Friday morning before. So I'm all pumped up about it. And somebody called me up and they're like yelling at me. Somehow they got my cell phone number and how come so-and-so wasn't in this? And I was like I'm just like, sorry, I've never heard of that. I should have probably, it was a coach that had moved out of the area or whatever. But I'm just like, and sometimes I explain it and people will say, well, how come you're so upset about it? I said, I'm not upset. I said, I'm passionate about it. But I said, I love the fact that somebody's complaining about it because number one, it means that they care about it. And you've actually, you've made a mark sort of a thing or whatever. And yeah, I just giggle at it because like what Dave was saying, we're in our third or fourth year. And I say to myself, when I first started this, like I say on paper, I probably put down, no lie, 250 to 300 names.
Wow.
Just off the top of my head, just started writing them down. We had the top 100 athletes and I threw in the coaches and I started. I'm not just saying that because he was in our first class and we talked about him already. I started with Coach Welsh and then I went from there, your high school guys. And then you got, like I say, a Watertown native that is now coaching a D3 school and won 500 games in South Carolina someplace. It never ends. It literally never, these lists will never end. But yeah, like I say, those debates, I like it. I really like when somebody is upset about it. That's the best thing we can do.
The worst thing, and you guys will understand what I'm talking about here. The worst thing, Ed, is when you have 10 slots to fill. You got 40 names. How do you prioritize? You know what I mean? It's one of those things. How do you get that person in there? And then you got to knock it down to 20. And then you say, okay, now we got to, it does take a long time. And you're right. There are some debates. I don't want to say arguments, but there are some debates on who should get in there. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, and I guess when I wasn't smart enough to, or didn't want to take time at the original when we first started it to say, okay, how are we going to do it? Like a lot of people said, oh, we need to have categories. They use the phrase categories. And I'm just like, well, we don't even quite know what we're going to get before we do categories. Number one, like I say, the big thing is getting enough names. Get the ones like the first year, another one that got in year two was Craig Conroy. And he's one of the names that when we looked at that 40 and he wasn't on our list of 40 that wasn't even nominated, we thought to ourselves, this is nuts. But then somebody else said, well, no, that's fine because we want year two and year three and year four to be good. So yeah, there's no quotas. The only other thing that we really ran into, and this year or 2020, I was proud about it, is Missy West was our only woman in our first class. We didn't have any in the next couple of classes, and people were concerned about it. And I looked at it and I said, "There's only one Missy West." Really, if you stop and think about it, and we did get Terry Haynes and Elizabeth Lucky in the 2020 class. So, it will happen. Like what Dave was saying, over time, it will kind of even out. Some years are going to be more coaches. So we don't have a thing saying we have to have 2 coaches, 2 athletes, 2 women, 2 whatever. We don't, so eventually we probably, and we do now, we have started a category of a pioneer category. So that way we do, like I say, instead of having, we aren't going to get that many old people that are 80 years old to get involved in this. So we're going to at least look at it and say, okay, these are the ones that we want to compare apples with apples as best as we can. But the other stuff, it's pretty much wherever the chips fall, they fall. And if it looks a little skewed one year towards a certain sport or a certain geographical area, so be it. And eventually, like I said, I mean, I look at the pro athletes that have come out of Section 10, and I'm just like, and we have kind of taken a couple every year sort of thing or whatever. And, eventually I think that's the only thing I look at it. And I'm not saying this because you guys are a Section 10 show, is I think our high school coaches, we know them down in the Frontier League area, but I think we look at the list that I look at it and I say to myself, there's a lot of pro athletes up there. We don't know about that almost pro athlete quite as well as we do in other places. And I look at like a guy like a Mike Obel, who I think has done very well, or people know who he is because he's a Lowville guy. So he's a Section 3, he's a Frontier League guy. Then he went up in St. Lawrence. So the people that at St. Lawrence University know who he is as well. So when you send his name out on a ballot, people are familiar with it. But like I said, there are some people that just that probably aren't getting their fair recognition, and that'll happen eventually. The big thing is, like I say, to try to get our voting base to be well representing the North Country as well.
Well, Ed, I mean, that was pretty thorough. I mean, it's really good to know how this is run, and I think it's great. Here's hoping that you can get that 2020 class in,
Yeah.
in the appropriate manner too, because I know personally in my Hall of Fame, if you tell me that I'm going to have to only allow a certain amount of people in or anything like that, it's just that wouldn't be the same, and I'm sure you'd feel the same way. You want to do it the right way.
Yeah, and that's our big thing is not, if we had a class, like I say, if we had a class of 5 or 6 and 5 of them were deceased, we may look at it a little differently. But I looked at that, and I think it's pretty well represented and things. So like I say, I think we'd be shortchanging it. There are some things I think we'll probably treat them a little bit better. We can probably do some more virtual stuff. We'll try to get some video to throw up on Facebook that that's why I say in that first year, we probably weren't prepared to do some things technologically because we're just trying to get through everything and get it. So, I mean, that was a great in-person thing, but to be able, I mean, if we ever had some video from that first induction ceremony, I mean, that would be pretty crazy. But like I say, to get some things to be, because I think the world is going to go more virtually. I mean, just the way it was already moving in that direction, and now it's going to happen more often. So to be able to maybe live stream a 2020 induction ceremony with a live audience there as well, I think that would be pretty cool.
I agree.
Yeah, well, we didn't do this like this, Ed, to be honest with you. When we started this, we were sitting at a bar and doing a live interview with people, taking breaks in between a couple, dinner and a couple of cold beverages. And here we are now, and the COVID has definitely changed everybody. I mean, we aren't broadcasting, we aren't coaching, and this is where we are in our world today. So this is how we're taking care of it, by doing interviews.
Yeah. Well, it was fun, guys.
All right. Well, Ed, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm sure Joey and Dave really appreciate a lot of great information there. And we continue. We hope you have continued success with the North Country Hall of Fame.
All right. Thanks, guys.
That's going to be it tonight for ESS, Empire State Sports and the Wise Guys Sports Talk Show. For Joey, Dave, and Pete, and our guest, Ed Murphy. Good night, everybody, and stay safe.